Good morning to each and everyone, and welcome to the Enterprise Digital Transformation Asia 2022 virtual conference. My name is Jed from Ascom Events, Asia's leading B2B conference producers. We appreciate everyone for taking the time to attend our event and hope you learn a thing or two and have a fun and learning experience in our two-day event. First and foremost, we would like to thank all of our sponsors for making this event possible. Our diamond sponsors, Neo4j, OpenText, and Freshworks. Our gold sponsors, Adobe and Tricentis. Our presentation sponsor, Fivetran. Our knowledge sponsor, Elastic. Our exhibitor sponsors, Gorgeous, KMS Solutions, Appier, and IT Group. All of our sponsors have their respective booths over at the booth section of the platform. If you have any inquiries or just want to know more on what they can offer, the digital transformation space in your region, please do pay them a visit during anytime during the event. Some of them even have downloadable content and free gifts to give away. Lastly, a few reminders for our audience. On your right-hand side is the chat box. You may send your comments here. Right beside that is the questions tab. If you have any questions for any of our speakers, you can send them here, and all of our speakers will be more than happy to answer them during the event. And lastly, we have the polls tab right beside that. We'll be sending in polls here for everyone to answer all throughout the event. We do appreciate everyone's feedback and participation. So without further ado, let's start with the first session in our of the first day of our event on a presentation by Brandon Richards, General Manager for Asia at Neo4j, on why graph data platforms are essential for digital transformation. So over to you, Brandon.
So Brandon Richards, I'm the General Manager for Asia at Neo4j. And the topic is why graph data platforms are essential for digital transformation. And given that we're in the automation track, I would also say for automation, right? And that's, we'll give several examples of this. But I often like to start with this, this chart here that shows kind of the data maturity of organizations on this data journey. And almost everyone that we talk to is stuck at this information stage, right? So they're gathering vast amounts of data, but getting value out of that data is really challenging. So they have their data lakes, and they're probably gathering more data in the last couple of years than they've gathered in the entire existence of the organization. And yet getting the value has been a real challenge. And where graph data platforms come in is effectively connecting the dots across the data. So that organizations can progress more towards the knowledge, insight, and wisdom that they're hoping to in their maturity. But if you don't connect the dots, it's effectively you're trapped. You're stuck at information. So when we talk about graphs, just by way of definition, what we're referring to is a network of interconnected things. This is the mathematical concept of graph rather than charts or visualizations. So when we're talking about graphs, we're talking about things connected to other things in this network, right? And we live in a world of interconnected things, right? Everything around us is connected to other things, and we get a lot of context from that. The way we think, the way we process information in real life is through the connections between things in that context. Unfortunately, when we think of how we capture that data, we translate this rich, contextualized information that's all around us into rows and columns and tables. And this is what every organization has done, right? For a very long time. The challenge here is that there's a cost to this approach. Right? When we're translating that information, that data around us into rows and columns, we lose the relationships, we lose the context, and we lose the insight. So this is where graph data platforms come in. So we are actually going to store the data as things connected to other things in a network of, or a graph, right? So we can store it, and this is where we have basically a graph database. So you can store and retrieve data from the graph, and we can also visualize that graph, right? And so while graphs are not, in the context of graph data platforms, graphs are not graphs in the sense of charts or visualizations, they're still very visual, right? And so we can get a lot of value by viewing the graph. And then lastly, graph analytics. So once we have the data stored as a graph, there's certain things we can do that you can't do if your data is stored in any other way. And the types of insights and things we can glean from our data is really powerful. Now, one of the problems that we're overcoming with graphs is that if you wanted to create relationships in your traditional data stores, you would effectively typically create an index linking, say, one table to another table, right? So I want to link my customer table to a transaction table, and you can do that. The challenge is that it's still just an index. So what you're doing is at query time, you're trying to look up how those things are related. And if you have complex or rich data, you're going to find that you can only traverse about 3 hops. So you can go across 1 relationship, 2 relationships, three relationships before you can't go any further than that, right? In a real-time application. So you've got these kind of limitations to, your performance really starts to degrade after about 3 of those hops. Whereas with a graph database, because we're storing the relationships in the graph, we don't have to calculate that when it's time to query the database, right? So it doesn't matter if it's 3 hops or 3,000 hops or 3 million hops, we can do that in milliseconds. So the value, though, that we get from that. So everybody wants faster, but this is not really about doing something faster. It's about what that performance enables you to do. So because we can do that multiple orders of magnitude faster, we can now start to ask much more interesting and sophisticated questions of our data. The kinds of questions that were just previously impossible to get in any kind of a reasonable amount of time. Secondly, we can start to do things in real time that used to be batch processes. So instead of dealing with stale data or old data, we're getting real-time insights into things like supply chains or fraud or whatever it may be. Thirdly, so if it's probably obvious, but if you have connections in your data and you have this contextualized, connected foundation to your data, you're going to get much better outcomes from your data science, your AI and machine learning initiatives. So in a way, previously, the way you were doing your data science, AI, and machine learning is on this discrete data, right? But you're ignoring half the data, the relationships between the data. You're ignoring that half. And of course, with working with a subset of your data, you're not going to have as rich outcomes as you will using a graph context. So this is actually a very hot area in data science. It's really exploded in the last couple of years. Lastly, graphs are very, very flexible. Labeled property graphs specifically are very, very flexible. So if you have changes that due to evolving business requirements, you want to make some adjustments to your schema in your data store. This can be done in seconds or minutes in a graph. So if you have evolving business requirements, or if you have new types of data you want to store in the add to the graph, or if you have new questions you want to ask of your data that you didn't think about when you were designing your schema, all of these are not a big deal in a graph. You can make these tweaks. You don't even have to stop the graph or shut down the database. You can do this in real time. It's very, very quick and very easy. So in a way, graphs allow you to future-proof those applications. You can adjust very quickly to things that are happening, and especially in the context of things like fraud or recommendation engines or a lot of automation and processes, you're going to find the need to be able to be very agile, and graphs give you that. Now, as you can probably imagine, if we get rid of all these constraints that we've been living with for so long, it's a little bit like a race to value. Everyone's racing to see how they can leverage this to the greatest advantage over their competition, right? So, but we basically classified this into a few buckets. So some of the ways we're transforming industries: one, data-driven discovery and innovation. So we see this a lot with organizations that have a lot of unstructured data, for example. And this unstructured data is just sitting there doing nothing in their data stores. But they want to be able to get insight, search for the kinds of things that will be useful to them, or identify trends, make predictions from this unstructured data. This is very common in areas like oil and gas, where they have a lot of unstructured data, or you see this in organizations in manufacturing or service oriented, or life sciences, where you have this vast amount of work that has done, a lot of research that's been done, and you're trying to effectively find that needle in the haystack. So this is one big area. Another is hyper-personalization. And I would say every organization that I can think about is looking to personalize the experience. And having this contextualized graph is the way to do that. So customer 360 type initiatives, it may start with a customer 360, but now we want to leverage the connections across this data to deliver a hyper-personalized experience. So product recommendations, personalizing an experience of, for example, I'm thinking of one organization, Meredith, who in their digital transformation, they were previously kind of a magazine asset company, right? They own all of these assets, and they've moved to more digital assets. So of course you've got these digital assets online, people coming to you anonymously. How do I reach that individual who's coming to me anonymously? And this cookie that's going to expire in just a few days, I have a hard time really building up enough information on someone to deliver a hyper-personalized recommendation. But they found a way using graph and graph analytics to start to link these anonymous people together and link them to sometimes existing customers. So they could effectively deliver a much better recommendation, and that ended up resulting in people staying on their website 6 times longer on their digital assets, a 6x improvement in how long people are staying because the effectiveness of those recommendations. So really powerful. Enhanced decision making. So we see this with things like fraud prevention, where I want to be able to detect, and this is automating, right? I want to automate this process of detecting something like a fraud or a cyber threat or something along those lines, and be able to, in just a few milliseconds, do very complex pattern matching. I want to detect if any of these 8 super complex patterns are present in this transaction in less than 4 milliseconds. So that if I detect that, I can kick off a workflow to stop the transaction. Or maybe I want to notify a regulator, or I want to kick this into a workflow for an analyst to review. So all of these types of things require having kind of that graph foundation. Massive data integration, and this is very common, right, with digital transformation. And it's often the first step, where I want to pull together everything I know about my customer, or everything I know about my supply chain or my product, and I want to link it all together and have this complete view of those things. And this is often where people will start before they do the enhanced decision making, their automation of processes or their hyper-personalization. They need to link it all together and build something like a knowledge graph or a digital twin of an asset or a process or a system. And lastly, we've already kind of talked about this, is the data science, AI, machine learning. Now I want to be able to predict things. I want to look at customer journeys or patient journeys and make predictions of what is going to happen. And this is, again, very powerful once you've connected all the dots. Now, it probably should be no surprise that the analysts have taken notice of graph. The last 4 years in a row, Gartner has featured it as one of their top 10 trends in data and analytics. A few of the quotes that I pull from that. One is, using graph techniques at scale will form the foundation of modern data and analytics. The foundation of modern data and analytics. So graph is that key foundation of and the future of modern data and analytics. Secondly, we have 50% of Gartner inquiries on the topic of AI involve a discussion of the use of graph technology. 50% of those wanting to talk about AI are graph is a part of that conversation. So I think that's also very powerful. This one is from the 2021 report. Graphs relate to and enable many of our current and past trends, including, and then they have this list, right? Data fabric, natural language processing, the rise of the augmented consumer, X analytics, and smarter, more responsible, more scalable AI. So graph is it relates to and enables many of these things that we want to do. And to illustrate that point, I'm going to use the 2021 top 10 trends, where graph was one of the 10, right? Number 8, graphs relate everything under the distributed everything. And I just pulled some quotes from that were throughout the entire report. So these are quotes not from the graph section, but they're talking about composite AI, that knowledge graphs and rules are a key piece of that, or explainable AI, where graphs are the foundation for being able to do that. Or within data fabrics, how knowledge graphs are critical as a part of that. Or AI solutions will evolve from being based on one type of model or ensemble of models to being made of composite models with graph techniques playing a prominent role. So the point being that all the things you want to do in data and analytics, there's a good chance that graph is a prerequisite for that, right? So, and it should make sense. Before I can do a lot of the things I want to do, I have to connect the dots across that data. So it's a big part of a lot of these digital transformation strategies and automation strategies, where I need to start to connect the dots first. Now, the last quote's from the 2022 report. Context-enriched analysis builds on graph technologies, and they're predicting by 2025, context-driven analytics and AI models will replace 60% of existing models built on traditional data. So this connecting the dots is a game changer when we're thinking about AI data analytics. So it's probably, again, no surprise that graph adoption has exploded. We can see here the trend over the last 10 years or so, where you have all these ways of storing data, but storing data as a graph is exploding in popularity. So it's growing much faster in popularity than any other way of storing your data. And basically, this is relevant to every industry, right? Every industry has connected data problems. So there's no one industry where we play. I mean, certainly we see major issues in places like financial services, retail, manufacturing, life sciences, government. But every industry has connected data problems. So graphs and graph data platforms are at the heart of digital transformation. Right, it plays that key role. One example of this is digital twins. So I want to create a digital replica of assets or systems or processes, right? So using the example of assets, I need to know every part and every system on this asset and how they're connected and related. So I want to do things like troubleshoot what's going wrong, or find root cause analysis. These kinds of things can be done once I have this digital twin of that asset, system, or process. We also build knowledge graphs as a part of this, where we have data, and when we add data relationships to data, we can build a graph. But when we add semantics, ontologies, taxonomies, a little bit more structure, we get to knowledge graphs. And so you probably have heard this buzzword already, but knowledge graphs are exploding. People are finding that being able to have a complete view of a particular thing within their business is incredibly valuable. And it's kind of that first stage in being able to do automation or hyper-personalization. They have to first build this knowledge graph. So these digital twins and knowledge graphs are driving better analytics, better AI and machine learning outcomes, hyper-personalization with recommendations, automating these processes that can be very complex and challenging. So all of these are happening. And we're also seeing that instead of just having data lakes, people are moving to knowledge lakes, right? Where we basically have a data lake where we've connected the dots across that data lake, and that becomes this knowledge lake that we're adding into our infrastructure, right? Our data infrastructure. Now, let me tell a few stories of organizations that are doing this and what's happened. So let me start with NASA. NASA and their digital transformation, right? Well, they had a problem where they found that they had groups or teams that were solving problems that had been solved many times before by NASA, right? But knowing the finding answers to questions that they knew as an organization they'd solved many times was very difficult. Now, they did have a lessons learned database. So anytime someone does a project at NASA, they take meticulous notes. And so these notes are stored in their databases as free text, unstructured data, and that's fantastic. But again, finding that needle in a haystack is very challenging. So in particular, they were working on the Orion project to get to Mars, and they had a problem. They were trying to solve this problem, but they could not find the answer. And they would do a search. I'll just give an example. I want to know how this particular compound interacts with this material at this temperature, search, and it would come up with 30,000 results in their lessons learned database. And they try and go through, number 1, number 2, number 20, number 50, 200, and they're not finding what they're really looking for. Now, their chief knowledge officer said, well, why don't we build a knowledge graph, right? Where every word, it's kind of like a semantic knowledge graph. Every word becomes a node in the graph. And that node rolls up to a topic or a concept. And that topic or concept is in a sentence, which is within a paragraph, which is within a document. And it's authored by these individuals, right? So it starts to kind of take this graph structure. And they go through this, natural language processing, extracting named entities and linking them all together. So you go through this process. And once they built the knowledge graph, then when they're trying to do that same search, how does this compound interact with this material at this temperature? What they're really doing is triangulating where do these 3 topics or concepts converge in the same document or in the same paragraph or even in the same sentence. So this became very, very powerful for NASA in finding those answers. And some of these projects that were on the critical path could be eliminated because they found the answer. They already knew that. So the takeaway here was that NASA's knowledge graph removed 2 years from the timeline to get to Mars. And you can imagine the impact of something like that. Other organizations like Caterpillar doing something very similar, right? Where they actually had a couple of knowledge graphs. One was they wanted to be able to answer any question related to supply chain in real time. And secondly, something very similar to what NASA did with dealing with this unstructured data and building a knowledge graph for the ability to search around maintenance and repairs. So here's a screenshot from their presentation. They basically, similar to NASA, when a technician goes on site, does some work on a piece of equipment, they take these notes on everything that happened, and that's stored in their data store as unstructured data, right? And it basically sits there, does nothing, right, previous to graph. So they're getting basically zero value out of that. I mean, who's going to go and search through and parse and try and find something just from this free text, right? But they did the exact same thing as NASA. Every word becomes a node. It rolls up to a topic. They're extracting the named entities. They're identifying what parts of this text is actually the complaint. What is the cause of the problem, and what was the corrective action taken, and whether it worked. So they build this graph structure. Then the next time a technician is going on site trying to resolve an issue, they are saying, well, the last 10 times we had a problem with this part doing these things, what was the cause and how do we fix it, right? So that's pretty cool. That's pretty useful. But they even take it a step further, right? Where they're now starting to be able to do analytics on this and say, well, it's interesting that this particular part is causing a lot of problems. We see a trend here, and maybe we need to re-engineer or get a new supplier for this part, right? Or they may also find that, hey, this part is failing in these time intervals. So maybe we need to do preventative maintenance in this interval, a shorter interval, and we can avoid this problem altogether. So they've taken this data that was sitting there doing nothing to something that's giving them a huge amount of insight, a huge amount of value in the terms of identifying trends and making predictions and improving their maintenance. Now, their knowledge graph around supply chain was this, right? They wanted to be able to ask, this is just one fragment of their ontology, but they wanted to be able to ask any combination of questions within this domain and get that answer in real time. So I want to know how much of this particular product line that was manufactured at this particular facility between these dates that was shipped to this particular marketing district during these dates. And I need to be able to get that in real time. Now, in a traditional data store, you could optimize for one particular question, right? But to be able to optimize for every combination of questions would be impossible. Those are this is an example of those multiple hop queries, right, that I was talking about before. And in supply chain, you can have these queries that are hundreds of hops, not just, three or four. So this was very powerful. And you can imagine the more complex the ontology, the more value a graph is going to add in these kinds of situations. So again, very, very powerful. They can get real-time insight into answering these questions about that. Now, NASA, not to be one-upped, did something very similar with the International Space Station, right? So they can now start to get this kind of similar insight from the International Space Station of identifying trends, making predictions. And then they said, well, why don't we apply this to our workforce, right? So we see it from a human capital program where they want as much insight as they can possibly get from the people who are working in their organization, what skills, abilities, knowledge that they have, and then being able to map that up to requirements across the organization, or figure out if somebody leaves, who's someone who's very similar, or has a very similar skill set or knowledge set, or who do we turn to for these kinds of problems, or who's likely to churn. They can do all kinds of really interesting analytics once they have it all in that graph. Now, we've seen a few different types of organizations. Banking, of course, financial services. We see this in insurance and banking all the time, where they're doing something very similar as a part of their digital transformation. They want to be able to pull together kind of in this sense, Citibank, we're going to talk about, who pulls this data together in this master graph and be able to get a complete view of something. And in their case, you've got these individuals and groups of individuals, and you've got organizations and groups of organizations. You can kind of imagine this cluster or graph of people or organizations, and they want to pull all the data they know about those, right, from all these different systems. So, clients, accounts, interested parties, internal employees, the know your customer systems. They want to pull all that together, link it all in this master graph. And then their downstream applications can now link directly to the master graph instead of linking to those original data sources. And the value here is now they can ask those questions that were really complex connected data questions, right? So this is an example of their graph model. It's a little bit blurred out from their presentation, but you can get a sense of the complexity of the more information they pull into this, the more value they can get out of it. And so this was, they had a lot of objectives in doing this, pulling data from these legacy systems, making that data easy for consumption downstream by these other channels and applications, their data science readiness, ability to use this data globally and handle all the PII regulations, control who has access to what information or what assets within the bank. You also have kind of this entity resolution component, right? So ultimately, the idea is that Citibank was able to take kind of this next generation master data approach by linking all the data, make it easy to answer those very complex questions and start to build systems and automation around these things by having this kind of master graph layer in their data structure. So with Neo4j, with graph data platforms, we're the leader in the space. We're helping these organizations solve the unsolvable, right? And this is done, with graphs, connecting the dots. And I hope if you're not exploring graphs, I invite you to do so today. And please reach out to our team. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Brandon, for that great presentation. Yes, as Brandon said, if you have any questions or inquiries for him or Neo4j, you can catch him and the rest of his colleagues over at the Neo4j booth, over at the booth section. Thanks again, Brandon.
Thank you.
All right. So, up next, we have a panel session on sharing my digital transformation plan through 2025. And this panel, we have Michael Hyatt, Principal Solutions Architect at Elastic. We have Paul Sogianto, Strategy, Transformation, Digital Operation, Partnerships at PT Astra International. We also have Erica Denise Dizon, First Vice President and Head, FinTech Business Group at Union Bank of the Philippines. And our moderator, Mr. Suryadipta Day, Head of ASEAN Digital at Kearney. So, Surya, I'll hand it over to you.
Good morning, afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Great. Thank you for joining us for the session today, and thank you to the experts for taking time out and participating in the session. Today, as we would be exploring one of the hottest topics, which is on digital transformation, we would be gathering from our expert panel views on how they're driving either in their internal roles or with the clients that they work with, the digital transformation mandate, and share their forward-looking plans, what their priorities are until 2025. What we'll do is we'll start with a quick round of introduction. I'm Surya. I lead the Digital Center of Excellence for Kearney in Southeast Asia. Kearney, as you would know, is one of the premium management consulting firms globally. Personally, I've been working with leading firms in the region as well as globally to bring business and IT together on a shared vision for driving digital transformation. In my previous role was leading the digital transformation for BNP Paribas and one of the markets in Asia, driving their overall digital and innovation strategy. With that, I will pass it on to Paul Sogianto for a quick round of introduction.
Hi, my name is Paul Sugianto. I'm currently the Chief Group Digital Strategy from Astra. For everybody who doesn't know about Astra, Astra is like a conglomerate in Indonesia, about 200,000 employees, 240 companies, and then we are actually working around different pillars of business, right? We have agriculture, we have automotive, we have mining, we have technology, we have infrastructure, we have properties, and a lot other area. One of the biggest actually financial area. And previously, before Astra, I was working mostly actually in Europe in Airbus. I was working about almost 10 years there, and then moved to McKinsey, 6.5 years. From McKinsey, I moved to several C-level position in Sinamas, in Jarum, and then now in Astra.
Right. Thanks a lot, Paul. And so super excited to have you in the panel and learn more from you in terms of the transformation that you're driving in Astra. And again, I've been discussing with Paul before, and it's amazing to see the broad mandate that he has in driving digital data CX in one of the largest diversified conglomerates in Indonesia. Next, I'll go to Michael. Again, if you can introduce yourself and talk a bit about your role in Elastic.
Thank you, Suryadipta. My name is Michael Hyatt. I'm a solutions architect with Elastic. I've been with Elastic for close to 4 years in customer-facing roles, and I'm seeing a lot of our customers going through this digital transformation journey. And I can definitely speak to the relevance of the capabilities and journeys of our customers. Prior to Elastic, I worked for a variety of companies in the integration space, and I'm familiar with sort of the how different customers approached, made themselves what their digital transformation journey looked like, how they API enabled themselves, where they started, how they went about it, and so on. So I hope my experience will be relevant to today's conversation, and great to be here.
I'm sure it will be, Michael. And then again, very much looking forward to your inputs on this. And again, from my perspective, if I can just add to it, right? Like we see a lot of companies focusing on transformation where they are not ensuring that the right operational considerations are put in as they kind of put in all these workloads and applications and capabilities in production, right? And this is where Elastic comes in a big way to ensure that not just from a transformation perspective, but from an operation perspective, you have the house in right order for kind of driving the benefits that you need from this whole investment that you're making. So apart from that, we will also have Erica from BPI Philippines dialing in as well. But maybe what we can do is we can just start off with the conversation, and then we can kind of get in Erica as part of the discussion as well. Again, as I mentioned, super excited to moderate this discussion with such an elite panel. Now, let us now dig deep into the topic that we have, right? Now, in just in terms of setting the context, the way we see digital transformation for all companies are in different phases, right? Different companies are in different phases of their journey. There are companies which are well advanced in their journey and are in value realization phase. Some have embarked on their journey and are making foundational changes in their platforms and the way they organize it themselves to capitalize on the opportunity. But when we talk with the leading CXOs in the region, right, there are three themes which always comes out, right? First, the question that they always ask is how do they rewire themselves to make the most of a fast accelerating digital native world that we are in, right? Which is cloud native, mobile first, and how can they leverage all these technologies to improve their internal operation? So I think that's one of the key consideration or questions that is there in all the CXO mind. The second is how they can leverage massive amounts of data and analytics to provide differentiated customer experience, and not just in a algorithmic sense, but more from a people and a human sense as well. And the third is again around innovation, right? How can they use this whole digital world and the opportunities it provides to provide innovative services, products, with the business models to their customers? So the way we'll do this conversation is we'll break it up into three blocks and we'll kind of adjust it based on the time that we have at hand. First block, we will try to understand a bit more from the panel that we have is what do you mean by digital transformation in your organization? What are your plans? What are your big bets? What are the business challenges that you're solving? Right. So that's the first block that we'll cover. The second block, we'll focus on the innovation and we'll try to understand a bit more from your respective businesses, how you see that in your industry and what kind of business model changes it's driving and how you incorporate innovation as part of your broader digital transformation strategy. And the third block will be how, to understand how you make it happen, right? Like what are the practical insights that you can share based on your learning in terms of driving these transformation that the kind of audience can take in and try to implement as part of what they do within their organization as well. So these will be the three kind of blocks that we will cover. So maybe we can start off with Paul. If you can maybe share what does digital transformation mean for your organization? What are your company's plans? And again, broadly, what are the key business problems that you're looking to solve from a digital transformation standpoint?
Yeah, I think like the most important thing that people need to keep in their mind, like in any companies that you are working on, or any business that you are starting as entrepreneur, right? Transformation is part of life. It means that you as a company need to keep going on transformation because like the time always changing, right? Competition will keep coming, technology will keep coming, customer will keep changing, right? So if you are not transforming yourself, you will be actually run over by the time. So the new generation will always come. So we need to put it like into practice that transformation is everyday life. We need to ensure that all people from the top until the people in the shop floor, into the frontliners knows we need to keep transforming ourselves. So for ourselves, transforming is the way of life in the company.
Completely. Can't agree with you more, Paul. Uh, so we see that we have Erica in the call as well. So Erica, we started off with a quick round of introduction. So maybe if you can just share about your role in BPI and just let us know how you're kind of driving digital transformation there.
Hi, Surya. Actually, I'm from Union Bank.
Sorry.
Yeah. No worries. Yeah, for sure. So, hi, I'm Erica Dizongo. I'm the head of the FinTech Business Group in Union Bank, as well as the Digital Services and Open Finance Center of Excellence. So, my particular role within the organization is number one. to have partnerships or have competition with the fintech partners to see if there are ways and means for us to partner and see we can offer new solutions and products for our customers. That's number one. Number two, we are trying to be the leading proponent of open finance and the open economy within the banking system here in the Philippines. That's the second one. And thirdly, in terms of digital services, we look at the various businesses within the bank and see how we could turn them and move them into the digital space so that we could increase efficiencies as well as increase the offerings for our customers.
Great, and that's super exciting, Erica. So maybe we can just go to the question that we started off with, right? Like, in terms of Union Bank, like, what does digital transformation mean for you, and what are your strategic priorities, and what are the key business challenges or customer challenges that you're looking to solve through the digital transformation journey?
Okay, so I think that question is three-pronged. Let me break it down for everyone to simplify it, right? So let's begin with the first. What does digital transformation really mean for us as an organization? So just to start, Union Bank itself has undergone our digital transformation journey 5, 6 years back. It started because we had a consultant come in and check how do we try to compete in today's world and the world that we expect in the years to come. And so the answer for that was to turn digital, right? So coming from that consultation, what we did in terms of digital transformation is number one, to change the mindset of the people within the organization. That should be the most important because at the core, if the people themselves don't know what it is, don't believe why it's important, then it's very difficult to transform the organization as a whole. So it was a culture thing to begin with, so that the people themselves would be their own ambassadors of digital transformation. And eventually, the hope was it will be translated into the work that they do for the bank. So that was how our transformation started. But what does it really mean for us, right? What is digital transformation? At the end of the day, it's evolution. I think Paul mentioned that briefly earlier. It's a continuous evolution of what we do as a bank and how we are able to service our customers. So there has been a saying from our president is we have to digitize or perish. And that's because if you look at the customers nowadays, they're very different from the customers that we had 20 years ago, 30 years ago, right? Their preferences have changed, and especially because nowadays everyone is more connected. There's a slew of information that everyone gets. Then there is more options. There is more choices. So because of that, how do you change yourself as an organization to compete in this type of environment? So I guess that's the first question of our transformation journey and what it means for us. Second, going back to the second question, what are the things that we are proposing in terms of digital transformation? So we try to put everything on the cloud. And one of the main challenges of that is definitely legacy systems, right? So we are a bank. We've been around for 40 years. And of course, there is a challenge to move those systems and into the modern world. So that's one of the things that we are struggling with. I mean, it has to be done, definitely, right? But it is a business challenge for sure, and it comes with costs as well. I guess at the end of the day, it's really assessing the risk benefit, whether moving there is beneficial or not. And the answer is yes. Secondly, the business challenge that we're undergoing and what we're trying to do right now is that, of course, as I mentioned, open finance. It's been done in the UK and in other countries, but in the Philippines in particular, the adoption hasn't been as fast, particularly because as a business challenge, the other organizations aren't as open to it. And by the name itself, right, open finance has to be a collaborative effort by multiple parties. So that's a challenge that we're undergoing right now.
Great, Erica. And I think these are a lot of great insights that you've shared. And again, it kind of links to what Paul was saying as well. And maybe if we can just double click a bit, right? Especially, how do you see this digital transformation mandate evolve due to COVID? And everybody talks about digital transformation being accelerated because of COVID, but At the same time, we know that COVID also resulted in a lot of bottom line, top line pressures for the organizations as well. So, in terms of your priorities, do you see that significantly change due to COVID, and how did you guys react to that? So, maybe Paul, if you could just start off and share your perspective from PTS.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like, COVID make people somehow changing in many ways, right? Number one, because the way of we are interact, the way we actually doing business actually somehow changing forever, right? So, and number two, because of the COVID, a lot of people actually working from home, and then that actually also like create us separation from the daily operation in a way. Therefore, we have actually more time to think, more creativity to be applied, how actually to make things done. So yes, in a way, although it sounds very bad to hear it, COVID did accelerate the digitalization. I think Erica will agree also on that because this is actually what we are doing. Because of COVID, a lot of things that we didn't do before, we implement it now. It's
Right,
accelerating and it's good for business.
right. And Erica, like, how do you want to share some of your experience? How was that whole journey during the COVID times? I know it was a lot of negotiations with the senior stakeholders, but how was it overall?
I think everyone in the industry trying to push for digital transformation agree that it pushed things forward for a lot of people. But because of the constraints that was brought upon by the COVID pandemic, right? People weren't allowed to go outside. People weren't allowed to go to bank branches. People weren't allowed to transact their usual business transactions in a branch. So we were forced to become creative in the sense that how do we continue to serve our customers despite these constraints? And so Union Bank responded in a sense that, okay, we pushed for our Union Bank online app to increase the usage because it kept people safe, because you could do your transactions online and at the same time keep yourself safe, right, from getting infected. But then we also had to realize that in the Philippines, not everyone has a smartphone, not everyone has internet. And so, how do we deal with that type of infrastructure constraints in the Philippines? So, in terms of creativity, we had to onboard pawn shops, 7-Elevens, and convenience stores as a way for us to send the funds so that people could still get their money through these counters where the banks aren't available. So it's really not a question of whether it helped. Yes, it helped. It forced us to become more innovative so that we could still serve our customers despite the constraints.
Amazing, Eric. And as we were discussing before, I happened to stay for some time during the COVID period, serving for one of our clients in Philippines, and the kind of success stories that we heard about Union Bank during that period was amazing. That you guys were able to not just keep the lights on, but you were also able to really provide differentiated, innovative services to the customers, much more than actually what we even expected, right? And during those tough periods. So now maybe Michael, if we move to you again, you have a unique positioning, right? You kind of see this whole digital transformation across companies, across regions, and again have the transformation part to it as well as the operations part to it in consideration as well. So again, from your perspective, how do you see digital transformation as a mandate evolving, and how you see clients are positioning themselves, and maybe what are you guys doing in terms of helping them with the journey?
Yes, sure. I think I'd like to basically, link it back to what Paul and Erica said about sort of the mandate. It's almost like do or die, and especially pandemic, elevating and escalating the need to enable these new digital channels. Um, so going to the definition, the by the book definition of digital transformation. Digital transformation is really about taking your existing applications, taking your data that you already have throughout the history, like you were running as a bank for many, many years. But now this data and application needs to be exposed to the new customers. So as Paul said, hey, you're gonna have new users coming to you through the new channels. So it's basically it's digital. It's enabling new business models that can be powered by these new digital channels, such as mobile apps, B2B and B2C channels, chatbots. Connecting like 7-Eleven stores, as Erica said in the Philippines. That was really sort of an eye opener for me. Like bringing banking to people who actually, don't have the technological capabilities to access the funds. So all that, basically, all the new world and the old world of applications and functions in the back needed to be connected. And it brings actually a set of challenges that all the customers pretty much need to be addressed. So how do we connect these new sources with the old applications, right? The new world meets a completely different set of non-functional requirements. There's a big fire hose of data or request responses coming your way, and making that old banking application be like making it able to serve these new requirements is the key challenge. And this is where things like doing API management, exposing these capabilities in a controlled way really makes a big difference. Having analytics and observability plugged into your enterprise from the get-go, closing that observability loop and being able to see where the user's coming from, what are the errors they're seeing, being able to restore the service as quickly as possible, right? That's one of the key capabilities we see organizations embark on even before they start the journey into the cloud. So first thing first, right? We need to sort out our observability. We need to consolidate our monitoring tools to be able to see what's happening in our enterprise. We put a layer of API management to protect the backend systems. We put a layer of caching. We separate the requests from, the read requests from the update and create requests. So doing all these sort of things to meet the new requirements coming from the new digital world. Then we see customers on board self-service capabilities. So they kind of trying to automate and trying to link the customers to the information they need to access, bringing in self-service search portals. So giving customers capabilities to find things themselves, to self-service through, the power of search, surfacing the right information, avoiding having to contact the person on the other end in the bank, and basically saving money, making the bank and making the organization more productive and more sort of fit for purpose in the new digital world. And it was interesting to observe that COVID actually accelerated all these demands, and it was the famous, I think, joke about the catalyst for the digital transformation. And there were three answers, whether it was CIO, CTO, or COVID, who basically was the biggest driver for digital transformation in the organization. And I'm pretty sure everyone ticked the COVID answer, because that's just like, pretty much limited the ability of everyone going through the traditional channels and forced organizations to become more sort of modern and meet the requirements of the new emerging world. So
that was an amazing statement, Michael, and I'll
Yeah.
use that in my further sessions as well.
I'll share the link. It's quite a famous
I
joke.
can't agree with you more. Like this whole COVID has like more than the leadership mandate and all. COVID as a standalone has driven the whole digital acceleration in such a big way that, and all the companies are seeing the reality, right? They have to, and as Erica and Paul mentioned, that you either perform or you perish, right? So you have to perform on the digital space, and you have to keep yourself relevant. Uh, we have a very good question from the audience, which is around the low-code platform, and how do we see that as a main driver to fast-track digital transformation? So, Michael, do you want to share some of your insights?
Yeah. So low code platforms were sort of gaining momentum in the past, and low code platforms, just for those just to bring everyone on the same page, it's basically the ability to connect, for example, to build APIs without writing code, right? So being able to define a flow, being able to tap into different systems, bring back the data, assemble the response message and send it back through the API. I think it was a great way to propel a sort of bridging the gap between traditional systems and the new digital channels, by being able to create new integration flows, define API management policies as sort of declarative statements. So on one hand, low code tools were a great sort of accelerator to build this new set of APIs, for example, get the data out there, put a layer of protection in a form of API management on top of those, because essentially, digital transformation, it's at the core is largely an integration problem, data integration, and
Right.
So it's basically bringing the data together, putting it in the right format, responding quickly, protecting the backend systems through API management. So on one hand, low-code platforms allow the organizations get there faster. On the other hand, they tend to sort of, you need to be careful with those, because you may end up with a proprietary coding language,
Yep.
proprietary configuration language, proprietary platform that may not scale with your requirements, right? So you'll be on the market hunting for a very particular skill set. And if this is a very popular tool set, everyone will be looking for this specialist. So
Yep.
you need to balance. As anything
Totally.
in the world, it's got basically pros and cons, and it's a
Yeah.
double-edged sword, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
completely, Michael. And I can just share quickly my experience here. Like right now, I'm working with a telco client, and actually, 35% of their incidents right now is because of a platform, which is a low-code platform, which is amazing from a accelerating and basically the time to market kind of realization. But since it's, as Michael is saying, it's proprietary and it's kind of a black box, the client is like having significant challenges to do the configuration and able to remediate and basically find the real issue of the problems that they have, right? So again, we have to balance it out. We need to see where it's really relevant and it gives us the flexibility, but at the same time, sometimes we also need the configurability and the ability to customize the platform ourselves, rather than it being a complete black box. So it has to be something which needs to be well evaluated. Now let's go into the second building block for this conversation, right? Which is innovation, and I know it's going to be something which is very close to the heart of both Paul and Erica in terms of what they're driving. So how do you see innovation playing out in your industry, and what are the kind of use cases that you're driving in terms of innovation, and how do you see innovation broadly integrating within your broader digital transformation agenda? And again, if you can maybe share some of your use cases in terms of what you're doing on it, that'll be great. So Paul, if you can, maybe we can start with you, and if you can share your insights from PD Extra.
Yeah. I think like same like Erica, right? Our business actually facing a lot of disruption, right? So we actually like we started as a very operation company, right? Manufacturing operation company. We manufacturing automotive, we sell automotive, we have the financing, we have the properties, we have the highways, we have the real estate, we have agriculture. So it's like and financing, right? It's very disrupted market, right? A lot of company actually trying, especially in the finance sector, where our finance actually part of the biggest business in our company. So we actually embrace the changes. We are not trying to actually like creating another hurdle for people actually joining into the market. No, we embrace it by doing the innovation. So since actually, and also because of the COVID, we already launched, actually not launching, we already launched several new products, right? Just example, right? Uh, we have like Mobi, the online marketplace for used cars. We have Sefa, the online marketplace for the new cars. We have Moxa, which is the financial one-stop solution to get financing, to get financial technology service into one application. We also have like Astra Pay, which is like our e-wallet for Indonesia. So that's the way we do it. So let's embrace the changes. Also, like embrace the new technology, right? With the low code. We cannot always like, okay, let's stop and then just focus on the what we know. No, I agree with Michael, but be careful. Take a look on that. We cannot stop the changes. We cannot stop the modernization, but embrace it with cautious. Take a look on the risk. Is it scalable? Is it can be customizable? What will be the standardization in the future? What will be actually the regulation around it? Who actually own the proprietaries around it? Right. So yes, innovation is becoming part of our life where we need to keep innovating, to keep new product, to bring in new digital product, to actually digitize our company so we won't be perished. We don't want to take a look like, oh, we need to do this because we don't want to be Paris. We actually want to step ahead into that. Same what Erica also doing with the banking sector, right? Let's actually shape the market instead actually being forced to be to change, right? So let's enforce. So let's take a lead so we can shape the market instead actually to be forced to change.
Great, Paul. I think you touched upon very important points, right? One was you see that taking calculating risks, right? Well, the way we kind of put it across is something like a disciplined innovation. So you need to innovate, but at the same time, you need to be disciplined in the way you kind of execute it as well. And maybe just one follow-up question, Paul, like especially in a diversified conglomerate like PT Astra, like innovation as a mandate, is that centralized within your function, or you typically have different innovation teams sitting in all the businesses that you have?
That's a good question, Surya. Uh, the way we do it like this, right?
Mm,
We have centralized function, but we also let the business unit to keep innovating themselves
right.
because the central function cannot see what is actually happening on the side, cannot knows actually what happening in the reality, what is actually on the ground with the business unit. So we need to create the the situation or the condition where every part of the business unit want to innovate, not only from the central function. We from the central function help them. We also keep innovating ourselves, but we also help them to create the conditions so they can also innovate. For
Right.
example, we also created what we call Astra Digital Academy and Technology, where we created like boot camp, training, seminars for all people inside Astra to be taught, to be trained, to be part of the changes in the digitalization. So we have this group that actually managing this.
Amazing, Paul. And it's great to see that you have so many businesses and individually they are innovating. At the same time, there is this organization of yours which is ensuring that you can have synergies across all the innovation that you're doing across the different subsidiaries as well. So Erica, I know this is something which is very close to your heart. You already mentioned about open finance and all that you're kind of driving it. And again, as I would say, Union Bank is one of the front runners from an innovation perspective in Philippines. But like, just want to maybe try to get a bit of a feel on the bigger question here, right? Like, how do you see when you talk about open finance being baked into a broader digital transformation agenda within the organization, or innovation is seen to be separate, and then once it matures, it basically feeds into your digital transformation plan? So that's one. And the second, maybe specifically on the open finance, since you kind of raised it, what you see as the regulatory, like, are there like specific regulatory provisions around standardization of APIs and ecosystem, which is basically helping you in this journey, or you think that will be one of the key focus areas?
Yeah, sure. So in terms of open finance, definitely it's a big part of our own transformation. So we've seen it work in other countries. Basically, the idea is to make sure be the proponent of that in the Philippines. In terms of regulation, the Philippine Central Bank, or the BSP, actually has started a working committee so that open finance could be more widely used within the Philippine market. So they have actually set up a particular set of standards in terms of the APIs that need to be used to be able to integrate and to operationalize open finance. So yes, that's currently in the works. But what's currently happening right now is that the BSP wants to test first and learn. So that's the type of approach that the central bank is taking in terms of open finance. And so they want different players within the industry to experiment and see if it really works out. And then from there, they plan to come out with more specific policies revolving around open finance and open banking. In terms of what we're trying to do as an organization, definitely it is an innovation, right, in our part of the world. Um, some countries have moved on from open banking to open finance to an open economy. Um, but then for us, right, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of the incumbents prefer to deal with closed banking. Maybe it's a change in mindset, maybe it's a change in innovation, but the core of it all is that we need to understand what is best for our consumers. And since we see the evolution of how our consumers are, meaning to say they want different choices, they want different types of services, they want different features in products, then definitely, right, open finance and open economy would be able to answer that for them. So in terms of how we deal with that as an organization. I guess Paul also mentioned it, right? Innovation is great, but you have to be pragmatic as well. There should be an intersection between number one, is there a real client need for it? Is there a real clamor for it? And at the same time, does it make business sense? We don't want to just create products for the sake of creating something new, right?
Amazing, Erica, and great to see that the regulators are also being a great facilitator in the process. I know it's a $1 million question, and I don't know how much you'll be willing to share, but when we talk about open finance, right, the opportunities are like huge. Like there's so many use cases of it. But are there any specific bets that you're taking from an open finance perspective in terms of specific use cases?
Sure. Okay. So in terms of our organization, we look at the different units that would require APIs, and then we look at the use cases or models. So for example, we're looking at embedding FX rates, Union Bank's FX rates in platforms of our customers. So it's just a perfect example, right? Of number one, having a real concrete use case. So it is being used by our customers. It increases efficiencies, and at the same time, we're able to share information that we both need anyway. So that's just an example of how we are proponents of open finance, and eventually hope that that requirement, that use case, that need spreads within the financial industry in the Philippines.
Amazing, Erica. And we have like what 180 audience members here. I'm sure there's one developer who's sitting there and thinking whether I can work with Union Bank, or is there any support either from an API perspective or maybe from a funding perspective that Union Bank also gives, so that it kind of brings in that whole collaboration with the industry as well. So just wanted to understand, do you guys have any focus program where you have these open API that you started to expose, and you have some kind of a sandbox for third party kind of players to come in and experiment with you?
Definitely. So that's a great question. For us, we have an open API marketplace. So the idea is the marketplace becomes a Netflix of APIs depending on what you need. And you can just pick and choose which ones you think would increase efficiencies within your own corporations. So the idea is that we want it to be open, right? I think other institutions would require you to open an account first before testing out their APIs. That's not the route that we want to take. We want to make sure that when you use our APIs, it's because you've tested and tried it out already, and ensure that okay, it matches with our requirements. Because at the end of the day, APIs are the tools, right? The drivers are actually the partnerships and the use cases, and that's holistically at the heart of what open finance and the open economy is.
Can't agree with you more right now. So, Michael, maybe moving to you. Innovation, again, I know is something which will be a constant. It's evolving. And how do you guys see yourself positioned in it? And as Elastic as an organization, how do you guys help to innovate the different firms in the region? And also, maybe if you can share your perspective on where
Mhm.
companies are placing their bets, that would be interesting for us to know.
Sure thing. I think from what Erica said, so lots of organizations in Australia and New Zealand, they opening, especially in financial sector and open banking, they're opening their capabilities and presenting them as a marketplace of APIs, right? And then they sort of inviting their consumers and other partnership or partner organizations to come and innovate using those APIs. Now, there's a lot of capabilities where we at Elastic see ourselves relevant to that sort of API enabled, sort of new API enabled world. For example, you need to have robust analytics platform and observability platform that can keep your APIs running, can detect failures, can tell you when there's a surge in use, help bring your mean time to resolve of your incidents to close to zero, as close as possible. So observability becomes really critical and important. Now, open banking APIs, for example, they're mostly about read access to customer data, right? It's about retrieving information, and most of the read data is searches and aggregations and aggregated views of customer data. Now, doing it at scale requires the right technology, because we all know that there's an aging, sort of really old banking system that used to be the source of truth for this data for many, many years. You cannot wire your APIs directly to that old maybe it was a mainframe. You have to put something that can basically be readable and searchable cache that can also do aggregations. We see a lot of organizations doing mainframe modernization and sort of cache fronting with our tool set. So powering these sort of open APIs and enabling these open banking APIs. Obviously, putting a lot of APIs out there creates a big security problem. So it basically exposes your organization to the outside world. It basically, creates a massive attack surface. So cybersecurity becomes a big sort of concern for the businesses. We also see ourselves being, the security solution where, we help collect logs and telemetry from, your perimeter, from your logging, from logs from sort of your endpoints, that we basically can detect and mitigate attacks in real time as possible. So we see ourselves, sort of, to summarize it, we see ourselves play in sort of three different areas. So observability, basically getting visibility in how these digital APIs are using, being able to create, helping, bringing the power of search to enable these use cases and sort of keep the backend healthy and running, and cybersecurity as well. So Elasticsearch has been used in cybersecurity for many years. So we see ourselves playing in that particular space. So
Yeah. Yeah, so Michael, can't agree with you more. And I just like amazing to see the number of conversations that we're having with our clients where clients are investing in all these solutions. But now the key problem is how do they aggregate all the information from these different platforms that they have deployed and get a single window pane to come out with these actionable insights and also automate the remediation that's required for them to follow up, right? And I think that's a big focus area right now going forward. And again, thanks to all the kind of tool stack and all that Elastic and other companies are providing for this, but it's also around aggregating this information and acting on it. Great. So we kind of got a perspective from an innovation point of view and how it kind of bakes into the broader digital transformation agenda and what different companies are working on it. Maybe the final building block is around getting some practical insights of what works, what does not work as companies embark on their digital transformation journey, right? So maybe, Paul, if we can start off with you, getting some insights on what the critical success factors are based on your experience as through the journey that you've had.
I think there are several things, but let me just touch a couple of them, and then like Erica and Michael can continue with that, because like there are a lot of things actually in the transformation which is actually working, which is not working. Right? Let me just touch briefly. Like number one, actually the organization and people mindset. Right, the transformation always. Erica also mentioned before, right? Transformation start with the people, right? It's also end with the people. We need to ensure that we have the good mindset, the embedded in all our people, right, from the top until to the lowest level in the organization, that they know transformation is here to stay. The digital transformation will be part of the new life. Our service is changing, right? We need to learn a new capability. We need to learn how to provide the services with a new way. So all our people need to understand that we are changing. We cannot stay with the old organization. We cannot stay with the old way of doing the business. That number one, right? The kind of organization. Michael and Erica can touch more about it. And number two, what I also like a discussion with Michael, right? Be open, right? Embrace the changes, right? You cannot stop the transformation, the changes in the technology in the market. We need to embrace it, right? So we need to create a lot of partnership with a lot of technology company. We need to create a lot of joint venture workshop together with the tech company like Elastic company or other company, right? So we are working a lot, for example, with all the tech company, Microsoft, Google, you name it, right? We're working a lot with them to create new core competence for us to embrace the new technology. uh, on that, actually, we are my what we are doing in Astra, actually we are creating what we call Astra Startup Community. Okay, how we doing it? Number one, we have what we are doing, actually improve Astra portfolio for the future. So we have what we call Astra Digital Venture, which is actually doing investment for startup in Indonesia, Southeast Asia, and beyond. So where we can actually tap to the new technology that we don't have before, right? We cannot build everything ourselves. We cannot. Number so on the Astra Digital startup venture that we have. We also have what we call Astra Venture Building. We are building the new venture, what I said before, right? Astra created a lot of new digital venture. I mentioned about Mobi, Sefa, Astra Pay, Moxa. We also have like a Mofic for car rental business. We also have like Cari Parkir, which is like to find a parking place in Indonesia. So we have all of that actually to embrace it. And behind me, this is actually the backdrop or the background from the Astra Innovation Competition, what we call as Astra now. This is how we actually engage with the new startup people, with the students, encouraging them to create a new company, to encouraging them actually to put their innovation, to put their idea into the business. So we support them, we mentoring them. We also give them actually a substantial amount of financial backup so they can start the business and so on. So that's what we're doing. So let's actually start with the organization and embrace the changes.
Completely, Paul. And then the whole change management aspect of it is so critical as we kind of go along with it. So, Erica, maybe if you can just share your insights of what the key learning has been through the COVID times, before the COVID time, and post COVID times as well.
Sure. Um, Actually, during COVID, like while I'm sure every one of us agrees that it really pushed for digital transformation, I think the fraudsters have also pushed themselves to become more creative. And so, because of that, we also have to be vigilant, right? So, anyway, it was just an observation. I just wanted to bring that up. And that means we all have to become more careful as well. Because like as the world becomes more open, as we increase the number of APIs we have and connections that we have with each other, it opens us up as well, right, to malware and all of these things. So that's something that we have to be vigilant and careful of. Okay, so in terms of the things that have worked for us, so obviously it started from within digital transformation. What worked for us, I think, as well, is the strategy that we took, meaning to say, we looked at the different types of digital transformations and saw what was a good fit for the organization and our customers, right? You have to sort of connect these together and make sure that they match. So maybe just to give an example of that, because we are in financial industry and our consumers are getting a lot of choices, not just from other banks, but also there are challenger banks, there are digital banks, and there are fintechs, right? But at the core of it, one of the few things that we all compete on is data. And so I think data science has worked for us as a company. So we try to leverage on that as well so that we could offer better and more tailor fitted services for our customers. That's number one. Also, it gave us a better insight of who our customers really are, what do they really want, and what are the types of things that would better suit them in terms of building financial wealth, in terms of safeguarding themselves with the turns and the downsides, similar to what happened with us during COVID. So there, I would say number one, being vigilant in terms of the things that are becoming innovative, but that also includes the downside, right? Which is the fraudsters. And number two, checking your data because it is a rich source of information. A lot of people say it's actually the new currency. So we encourage everyone to look at that as well.
Right. And Erica, I can't let you go without asking this question on the challenger banks, right? So how do you see them? Like, how do you see them changing the industry landscape?
Okay, sure. So
And
one
I know it's a 1 hour discussion, but just
For sure, for sure. Okay, so one prime example that we've actually seen being done here is that these challenger banks are offering savings interest rates of around 6%, which is very, very high since banks would only offer around 1 to 2%. So that's a big, big jump, right? And so this type of service really encourages consumers to move bank and open accounts there. But what we did realize is that it's not necessarily sustainable to keep competing in that sense that okay, I'm going to give 6% as a savings rate indefinitely. But that's a prime example of what we're experiencing right now. Maybe definitely their cost of funding is lower. But at the end of the day, right, as I've mentioned earlier, it still has to make business sense because you can offer 6%, but if it's not sustainable, what's going to happen in the long run?
And can't agree with you more, Erica. And I think you touched upon that point on data, right? The fact that you guys are so data rich as an incumbent. I think to have that kind of asset would take a lot of time for the challenger banks to build, right? And they'll spend loads of money to have that kind of information, which you already have. Now it's more about how you use that information and make capitalize on it, which you guys are already doing right now.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah.
so Michael, in a way, Erica touched upon it, right? Be vigilant. That's one of the key learning, and
Hmm.
I'm sure you guys are almost at the center of it. But beyond that, what would you say to be the key learning from your experience?
I think in the vendor land, the key learning for us was actually being closely aligned to what our customers, actually how our customers, go through their journey, right? So, for example, I'll give you an example of a higher education sector in Australia that basically was impacted a lot by COVID because higher education in Australia relies on international students being onshore, studying onshore, and all of a sudden we had most of the students basically going home and turning to sort of remote learning, and that had all kinds of secondary effects on, say, vendor relationships that the universities in Australia had, right? That's a good example. And some of these relationships couldn't hold because, for example, the pricing models were not compatible with how universities wanted to sort of respond to COVID. And we kind of like we saw ourselves, we kind of we tried to, well, everyone tried to adjust to the new world. So in our world, so the recent digital transformation and COVID, where okay, how ready are we for the new challenges that the digital transformation and COVID brought along, and then how quickly can we respond? How quickly can we meet customer requirements? How quickly can we provide something that that our customers need right now? Which was a challenge and an opportunity, equally challenging opportunity. So it was both a challenge and opportunity for us as a vendor. Due to acceleration of the move to the cloud, we see basically our customers basically stepping up and speeding up their digital transformation, and then we see ourselves more relevant. So it's all about technology now because digital becomes the main channel for our customers. So there's more demand, I guess, and it's a great test. It's like, hey, you're a great modern cloud-ready vendor. You're gonna do more business. Well, legacy vendors with old sort of pricing models, they tend to see themselves basically being phased out and sort of falling off the wagon, so to speak. Yeah. So
Michael,
yeah.
and I think you talked about the degree of change, right? Like seeing my 5-year-old kid being more competent in doing a virtual class in Zoom, much more than what I am doing meetings in Zoom. It just shows the degree of change that we've gone through and how we have evolved over the last 2 to 3 years, so during the whole COVID time, right? And again, this is just maybe a bit of a personal example, but you can kind of extrapolate it to anything that you do as well, right? We are almost at the top of
That's
the
right.
hour here. And again, would really want to thank the expert panel here. I know you guys are super busy, and thanks a lot for taking time out and having this discussion. Personally, I learned a lot, and I'm sure all the audience members here would get some good insights which they would be taking forward and what they do from a digital transformation or a broader transformation perspective. Thanks a lot for your time.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you
Thank
for our
you.
panelists. Thank you to Surya for that great moderation of the panel. If you have any questions for any of our speakers here, you may reach out to them directly by clicking on the People tab on the right hand side. Or specifically for Michael and Elastic, they have a booth over at the booth section. If you have any questions for him or their team, they'd be more than happy to assist you there. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
All right. So that is a wrap for our first track for the first day, the Enterprise Digital Trends to Watch. See you all on the next track.